Hello there, my name's Caroline Murphy and I am a game designer and I am here to talk to you about producing a LARP. I am redoing this section. I originally gave this talk in 2019 and I'm redoing the initial section because the first time that I recorded it, there was no sound. So let's get started. So this is me. I've been designing and producing and playing LARPs for, actually it is 20 years now. I work at Northeastern University and teach people about how to do the art and business of making games. And I also am Chief Creative Officer at Encantrix Productions. And I am co-executive director of the Playable Theater nonprofit. You can find out more about Playable Theater at Playable Theater, spelled RE with a .org. Okay, so starting off, I'm making a few assumptions here. So if you're here, I'm assuming that you know what a LARP is. If you do not, it is a live action role-playing game, and you can Google the rest of it. I'm assuming that you know some general gaming terminology. So I'm assuming you know terms like PvE, which is player versus environment, or PvP, which is player versus player, things like that. And if you're interested in, and I'm also assuming that you are interested in producing a game either by yourself or in collaboration with others. Okay, so this is for part one, which is about conceptualization. So how do we come up with the idea for a game, for a LARP? So when I create my own games, I like to first start with something that I call the core concept. So the core concept is how you would describe the core experience of your game, which includes the central idea for the game, core gameplay aspects, who the players represent, and how they will engage with the game. The format of this is that you can write up a simple paragraph. So I'm going to be using the example throughout of Pocket Monsters The Hunted, which was a boffer campaign, a one-shot boffer weekend-long game that I ran with Monica Grabowski and Corey Knowles, who are two brilliant, lovely designers. We co-produced this game and it was a blast. So the example here is from Pocket Monsters The Hunted. Example. Pocket Monsters The Hunted is a horror comedy genre live action role playing parody game in which the players are starting level Pokemon. Over the course of the game, players will experience being captured and trained by familiar iconic trainers as they grow, empower, and evolve. They will uncover terrifying secrets about the world in which they reside, and soon they will fight not just for the glory of being the best there ever was, but for their very lives. So it gives you a really, really clear sense of what the experience of playing this game is going to be like. You know the genre, you know some tone things about it, you already know who you're going to be encountering, what your role is going to be, and then a little bit of the arc of the story too. So this is important because when it comes to messaging your players and getting people to be interested in your game, them having this core concept is really critical. Okay, the next thing that I like to describe is theme. So theme is what really gets people interested in your story. It's the why that your game exists. So I really like to think of it as what interesting question or questions is your game trying to ask? And what do you want people to think about? So for example, with Pocket Monsters The Hunted explores themes of social justice, revolution, and control of a narrative by an oppressive regime. What makes a monster? What would you do if you found out you were the unwitting and innocent victim of horrific abuse and tyranny? Who gets to decide how people are treated? So already you can see that like we're asking questions in this game about fascism and about the relationship of social justice to society. So now you have more of a deeper understanding of the kinds of reasons why this game exists, like what forces were involved in the artistic vision for this game. Tone. So tone is how the game is going to feel to those who are playing it. And this is really one of the most difficult things to nail down and communicate to people. So it's also why it's one of the most important things that you need to try to get really, really perfect clarity on. So it can be useful to invoke other inspirational media that has a similar tone to what you're going for so that you know that you're on the same page with your staff and your players. So Example, the tone of Pocket Monsters the Hunted is a zany mix of over-the-top comedy, gore, and psychological horror in which the players are able to be the ultimate heroes and win the day. So, media with a similar tone, Cabin in the Woods, Dale and Tucker versus Evil, Shaun of the Dead. So now you know that what this is going to feel like for someone who's playing it. You know, you get the sense of what the actual experience is going to be like. There's a big difference between looking at a picture of a cake and actually creating that cake and then eating the cake, right? And these are very different things that we're trying to describe, which is why we have these different aspects of core concept, we've got our themes, we've got our tone. Okay, next up is format. So format is how your game will actually take form. So I think about it as the best, so thinking about the best way to present your game is a really critical step that I think a lot of people really do miss when they're conceptualizing because they're used to thinking about formats that they're already familiar with. So truthfully, LARP is an extremely flexible format and you should think outside the box. Like you don't have to do a campaign buffer game. You don't have to do a 4-hour theater style game. You can do something that's 5 minutes long. You can do something that's, takes place over the course of an entire month. You can do something that's like a real time, collaboration for the first 3 hours and then goes into like strategic play via mail. This is a very flexible format. So point being, don't limit yourself. If your game is experienced in 5 minutes, let it live in that space. If it's experienced over many weekends, let it be. Do what I think knowing what you want to deliver and then executing on that is super important. So make sure that you have some familiarity with different types of formats before you decide on one. What types of formats are those? Well, let's take a look. So here's a classic game format, campaign game. So a campaign game is a game that takes place over the course of multiple years or seasons with like different sessions. So often these have multiple whole day or weekend long events, which are almost like episodes in each season. And usually this format is pretty heavily PvE, but not always. It usually has kind of meta plot lines that run across the course of all seasons, as well as kind of like seasonal villains, which help to develop the story. Some campaign buffer games have a planned meta arc. Some don't. Some are just kind of like keeping on going forever. So engagement with this type of format, you usually see a buffer style combat with this format, but that's not always true. There are many other engagement mechanics that could exist and fit nicely into this format of game. Another classic game format example is series games. So a series game is a game format that typically takes place over the course of a limited number of play sessions, usually varying in length from several hours to entire weekends. So it could be similar to a campaign game, except that there are not multiple seasons, but maybe a single season in which all the storylines are going to be wrapped up or discontinued by the game's end. They tend to create they tend to have more of a balance of PvE and PvP environment because of the fact that it is such a limited series. It's a little bit more acceptable for players to get into it with one another. But you can easily lean into one or the other. So engagement, you'll usually see kind of more unique or bespoke conflict resolution engagement mechanics in series games than the typical buffer game, but that's not necessarily true. But if you're thinking about this kind of series game, then you may want to think about unique engagement mechanics that could be pretty fun just for the thing that you're building, especially because you don't have to design for the longevity of the game. So you can make things that ramp up really quick to add to some excitement and escalation. And then another kind of classic game format is a one-shot game. So this game runs its course in a single session, whether that's an entire weekend, a few hours, or a matter of minutes. And the story is fully told and storylines are resolved or discontinued by the end of the play session. And these types of games often do contain more PvP elements, but they can, of course, still be entirely PvE. There's a huge variance in the engagement style and engagement mechanics that are in these games, which has given birth to a enormous taxonomy of different terms that attempt to describe these different styles of play. And so, there just as some examples: secrets and powers, interactive fiction, free form, Jeep form, uh, black box games. I just heard the other day someone told me about American jerk form, which are unplayable games. There are so many different types of games that kind of like fall into this format. But classically, these are kind of like single session arcs. And then mechanics. So mechanics are another aspect of like the kind of fundamental elements of what we're looking at when we're conceptualizing. So mechanics are how people are going to understand how they are going to engage with your game. This is not the same thing as rules. We'll get into rules later, but the mechanics of the game describe the ways in which a player may interact with different elements of the world and the story that you're presenting. So there exists a false dichotomy in some game design thinking that mechanics and theme are at opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to game creation, that you either have to start with theme or you have to start with mechanics. That might be helpful if you're considering kind of a top-down or bottom-up approach to design, but I really believe that mechanics and theme need to be very seamlessly blended together in order to kind of create and support the experience that you want to create. So in other words, don't make mechanics for shit that you don't want your players to do. Like if you have a mechanic that allows people to shoot each other and you don't want anyone to be shooting each other in your game, then why did you make that mechanic? Like you don't need that. Just stop. Get rid of it. So make the kinds of mechanics that are going to reinforce the types of behaviors and interactions that you want people to experience, and get rid of the rest. Just get rid of it. That's my advice. So here are some classic mechanics examples. Conflict resolution. So players will come into conflict in your world. That is kind of the essence of storytelling, is that characters encounter obstacles. So how you want them to resolve those conflicts are described by the mechanics that you create to allow interaction. So combat versus conflict. Will your players physically engage in battles or duels? How will you determine the winner? What if a player is unable to fight, but their character is a great warrior? Do your players need to keep track of their number of hits to a specific area, memorize a bunch of gestures or phrases to understand what's going on? There are a lot of ways to think about conflict resolution. Don't get stuck thinking that you need to use what you know. You can design anything. So that said, there are a lot of tried and true combat systems that you can utilize if you don't want to reinvent the wheel. And we'll get into that a little bit later. So some classic mechanics: skill use. Usually people would like to create meaningful opportunities for players to engage their real world or in-game skills in order to gather information, further their understanding, further their personal storyline. And very often these kind of fall into this classic skill paradigm of social, physical, and mental skills. And that classic paradigm allows players to engage their skills in this triad. You can develop mechanics that support these different interactions, whether they're realistic, like solving a puzzle for a mental skill, or simply analogs for a skill where you could just, like, let's say you have a pool of points and you spend a point and then you get the information kind of thing. So it can be really satisfying for players to have a variety of different options for engagements, because everyone's brain is different and every person enjoys different types of interactions. And just because I really like puzzles doesn't mean that my character necessarily is good at puzzles. So maybe I shouldn't really be doing the puzzles, even though, there's just lots of different options. So when you're creating these kinds of mechanics, consider if you have balance in these areas, and creating many different avenues can really enhance the accessibility of your game. All right, so that kind of covers up the core conceptualization topic. So get down to work. So first, write down your game's core concept, your themes, your tone, your format, and then take a crack at your mechanics. And once you've done all of that and you feel comfortable with it, move on to the next section. Thanks so much for watching.